Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today Great.com talks with Margaret Traub, who is the head of global initiatives for International Medical Corps.org. And if you haven't heard of them before, they are a non-profit relief and development organization dedicated to saving life and relieving suffering through medical services, training, relief, and development programs. And if you're new here into this podcast, you definitely want to press subscribe, either on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to talk about disaster relief and what we can do and why it's important to be first there, no matter where the disaster is, and much more. So, Margaret, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, how would you describe International Medical Corps to someone that is not familiar with your organization?
Sure. Well, so International Medical Corps is a global humanitarian organization, and we work in crisis and conflict zones, both natural disasters and man-made disasters. So we work in war zones like Syria and Yemen, Somalia, northeastern Nigeria, where Boko Haram is active. We also work in areas that have been struck by natural disaster. So, places that have been struck by cyclones and floods, whether it's Indonesia or the Philippines, places that are suffering from famine, places like Somalia, and parts of Africa where hunger is widespread. And we have a staff of about 8,000 employees globally, working in 30 countries. And these folks are mostly from the communities where they are working. They are local to these, actual countries. So if you go to, say, the Democratic Republic of Congo, 95% of our staff is Congolese. So these are people who are working to serve their own communities, their own neighbors. And this allows us to really do work that's sustainable and is culturally sensitive, because not only do we respond to crisis, but we train. So in the midst even of an emergency, we are training local healthcare workers and local communities to be able to carry on that work over the long term. And we find that that is really a mark of success, and our ability to be successful and sustainable is that training component.
Got it. So you're not only helping, you're also building knowledge and a culture.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Right. So what kind of work is it that you do then? Is it medical work or what else is it?
Yeah. So obviously the name International Medical Corps is medical, but we really focus on healthcare holistically. So the comprehensive notion of healthcare. So that means clean water and sanitation and hygiene. That means vaccinations for children, work on infectious diseases like COVID-19, as well as Ebola. We also provide nutrition, supplemental food and therapeutic food for malnourished children and mostly women and pregnant women and malnourished children. And also mental health. I think frequently we forget that the mental health impact of a crisis is every bit as important as the physical impact. And so we focus on frontline mental health work, even in a disaster. focusing on that component as well as the physical wounds that people suffer. So it's that wide spectrum of health and all the things that people need to be able to come through a crisis and rebuild.
Wow, it makes me happy to hear that you're taking that holistic approach. I think the mental aspect, like you mentioned, I mean, just knowing one person in your family that is depressed, how hard that is. But I imagine in a war zone, you might have a lot of people, might be going through difficulties to get help and to train those communities to help each other. I understand how meaningful that must be.
Yeah, and frequently, mental health is both stigmatized and ignored. And yet it's so hard to move on, as anyone who's ever experienced, trauma or anxiety or depression, it's very hard to rebuild. And so if we really focus on that aspect, it makes it a lot easier for people to rebuild.
I think so too, especially over time, the way you would change the culture as well. So help me understand then, you are working in not only a lot of different countries, but in also a lot of different cause areas and a lot of different aspects of medicine. How do you choose where to work? Because I guess in a perfect world, you would have unlimited funding, but now you don't. So how do you prioritize where to help?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And there is so much need, but we generally try to choose according to the hardest hit places or the most vulnerable. So generally, if you look at, say, the UN Development Index of countries, we tend to respond in the bottom countries, the countries that are really in the greatest need. You look at a place like Yemen, where millions of people are facing, severe hunger and starvation. So, and has on occasion gone into actual famine. And you have people who don't have the basics of healthcare and are suffering famine. So these are we look at the places that are really hard hit and say that's where we want to go. And different communities are going to have different needs. In one area, you may have really high rates of COVID-19 deaths. And so we'll focus on infectious disease prevention and treatment. Another area may have difficulties getting clean water. And so there are a lot of diseases around not having clean water. So we'll focus on water in that particular area. It just really depends on what, it's always a coordination with the community and a conversation. What do you feel your needs are? Not just us coming in and saying, here's what we're going to do. And to a large degree, it's about where we have identified those local groups that are going to be able to help us help them best. So, everywhere we respond, there are local groups. And so being able to get that traction is really important. But it is hard because there are a lot of places we want to go and don't know if we can, don't know if we can get the funding, don't know if we can gain access. Frequently, there are conflict areas. Venezuela was a very difficult place for us to ultimately register and be able to do work. It's a highly charged situation. There are difficulties with governments. So often in these areas that are experiencing conflict or displacement, it's hard to be able to enter and do work. But again, we leverage the local population, and places like South Sudan, where we have been operating since 1994, our staff of 800 people is almost all South Sudanese. They carry on the work over the long term.
Yeah, thank you for painting that picture. It makes it clearer for me to understand the kind of work that you do. So in what other ways are you different than other disaster relief organizations?
I would say that the one key component is the training. That concept of not just delivering aid to people or kind of a handout or healing a wound and then leaving, or staying for a period and then you pull up stakes and you leave and you don't leave anything behind. So I think that training part is really what sets us apart from other groups. It's been the core of our mission since our founding in 1984. And really, when our founder first started the organization with one program in Afghanistan, he was an American doctor who saw very quickly, I can bring in volunteers from America or wherever to heal wounds, but that's not really going to have a long-term impact. The needs are too great. I'm going to need to set up a training program to teach frontline medics how to do, a whole host of things that are frequent problems in the field, and then let them take over the long term. And he launched a training program and trained 5,000 health workers on some basic field techniques for treating 80% of what they were seeing. And that idea 37 years ago, was the beginning, was the grain of International Medical Corps. And then it expanded to other countries of training health workers to vaccinate children, so that you don't have to bring in vaccinators from outside, train the local people to do it, and you can vaccinate hundreds of thousands of people. So,
thank you for sharing the story. It's very inspiring to me. And also I can imagine how empowering it must feel for the communities when they feel like they are bringing the change from within. So thank you for that approach. Yeah. And your long-term thinking is making me curious. What do you hope to accomplish or grow into in maybe the next 5 or 10 years?
I think our goal is always to just reach more people. The fact is, unfortunately, the number of crises, conflicts, natural disasters are increasing exponentially. The number, say 10 years ago is not nearly what it is today. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we are seeing more and more disasters. We used to never respond in the United States. It was it was not something we had previously done until a few years ago, and the number of hurricanes were starting to increase. The number of wildfires were starting to increase. COVID hit, and we said there are vulnerable communities here in the country where we're headquartered. So we are seeing that more and more populations are in need. And unfortunately, because of the change in climate, we are seeing increased displacement of people as people go searching for water, searching for food, as arable land is starting to constrict, and as conflict is increasing. Famine is not a natural disaster. Famine is man-made. Famine is the result of conflict and people being forced to move and not being able to get clean water and food. So we are seeing more and more of. As you probably know, the number of forcibly displaced people in the world is, I think, close to 90 million. It's the largest number since World War II. These are the kinds of realities that we're facing. So we look at 5 years down the road as not where are we going to be, but where is the world going to be? And how can we be ready for that and be able to respond to the increased needs? And I think that's more the way we kind of look at it.
Thank you for that perspective. It really feels it helps me, and I guess our listeners as well, to get a better understanding of how the future is going to look and what is happening right now. For example, the number 90 million displaced people, I didn't know that number, and it's really mind-boggling. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's 80 or 90. I can't remember which.
Too many people.
Too many. Yeah.
Right. So what can someone do then? Imagine someone is listening, hearing these numbers, understanding there would be a higher amount of disasters. It might get even worse. What can someone do to take some kind of action steps to get involved in a positive way?
Yeah. Well, obviously, doing the kind of work that International Medical Corps does takes money. So certainly it's always helpful when people donate. On our website, internationalmedicalcorps.org, they can donate and they can learn more. And any amounts help, right? Like, I think people think, oh, I don't have a lot, I can't do a lot. But if everyone thought that, then no one would make donations, right? And yet the multiplicity is oftentimes key. So any amount does help. But that said, beyond actually donating, I think a huge step that people can take is getting educated. It sounds so simple and so obvious, but it really makes a huge difference when you start to read up on something, learn about what's happening in the world. You start to determine the things that you care about. You start, as you learn more, you say, this really strikes me, or this story of this mother or this child or this part of the world that I had no idea about strikes a chord in me for whatever reasons it might be. And we start to become receptive to learning more. And then I'm going to sign up for the newsletter. I'm going to start following them on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. I'm going to start looking at who they follow, who also has more information. I'm going to get myself educated about this. And I think I'm going to tell my friends about it. You start posting about things that you care about. I think we, especially through social media, are so cause-oriented. I know that all my friends are always posting about the things that matter to them. And I learn about them because of the things I know they're involved in. So I think it's kind of getting engaged on the issues, getting smart and getting engaged, because I know I feel better about myself when I am engaging in content that's meaningful, that is expanding my horizons. So I think that's one big way, is kind of spreading the word. I've learned about this organization. I love what they do. You might want to learn about them too. People hold fundraisers for us all the time online, and it didn't cost them anything. They just spread the word. So there are a lot of ways people can get engaged. I mean, they can tell their employers, do you have a matching program? I want to give to this organization. Will you match my donation? So there are a lot of kind of individual ways people can get involved. And the first way is to just kind of go to our website or our Instagram and learn more.
I see how your mindset of wanting to educate and change culture really, it comes through you in the way that how you're thinking about how an individual can take action as well. And yes, I do think that has huge ripple effects. So yes, do get educated. Thank you for that perspective. And Margaret, we're running out of time, but I really enjoyed listening to you. It's you're a terrific communicator, and it's very clear the way you're sharing your stories and sharing your ideas. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Absolutely, a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And for you listening, if you enjoyed this episode, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that is showing the algorithms that this is an important conversation. And it will be shown to more people that can then get educated, inspired, and wanting to take some kind of positive action to make sure that medical help reaches everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. What is great.com? That is the most common question that we get. And the shortest answer I can give you is that we are a company that is moving money from the online casino industry and donates it to charities that is helping the environment. The long answer, unfortunately, I don't have time to tell you today. But if you're curious, definitely Google what is great.com to learn more.